Hey everybody, blessed be, it's me, Witch Joseph. Today I'm doing a little video addressing something that I see periodically in witch spaces in some of the groups that I've created or on pages or in other groups that I go to. And sometimes you'll see people come into a group that will announce that I'm not a Wiccan, like that we're going to assume that they're Wiccan. And I don't know, there just seems to be a little bit of anger or something behind it. Like, I think that it's some kind of signaling usually where people don't want to be thought of as someone who believes, as the Wiccans do, in some kind of cause and effect or some kind of karma. And I know that that term's controversial for a lot of people. I don't think it should be, but I know that it is. Many people often will say that Wicca is really just Christianity, like in a new form. And while it's true that Christianity has influenced Wicca, and it's also influenced all forms of witchcraft in the Western world. I mean, there's very little in the Western world that hasn't been influenced by it. Some of the influence has been good and an improvement. For example, treating other people with respect and the way that we want to be treated. I think that everybody should be influenced by that at this point. And that should go without saying. But let's talk about what is witchcraft. First of all, witchcraft is the practice of magic, and at its core, it is a practice, not a religion. Witchcraft is the practice or practices that practitioners use to create change and conformity with will. And we'll get into the definition of magic in another video, but that's essentially what witchcraft is. And because of that, it doesn't require any recognition of any specific deities or any kind of conformity to a creed or anything like that. So witchcraft, those practices that create change and conformity with will, can be performed across a wide range of cultural influences and in different religious contexts or in no religious context. Witchcraft doesn't require adherence to a moral code, although I will have a caveat about that. I think that the practice of witchcraft, in whatever context, should lead the practitioner naturally to a realization that we're all interconnected and that there are certain requirements for human beings living on this planet in connection with other human beings and other non-human beings that should be evident after practicing witchcraft for some time, that we want to respect the integrity of other beings and their right to exist unmolested by us, and that sort of thing. There's a natural earth-based morality that arises from that realization that we are all part of a web of life and interconnected with each other. And what affects you affects me eventually. And that becomes apparent when you practice magic. I think that whether you're religious or not, that should be something that's apparent after a certain amount of time in practicing the craft. By contrast, Wicca is a modern pagan religion that emerged in the 1930s, 1950s. Around there, it came out in the open in the 50s after the last witchcraft laws were repealed in England and replaced with the Fraudulent Mediums Act. Wicca is an initiatory mystery religion, and it is centered around the worship primarily of a goddess and a god, and it observes seasonal festivals, 8 of them, Sabbats, and full moon rituals called despots. And a lot of witches outside of Wicca practice that too. And one of the things about it is that there are so many cross influences between witchcraft and Wicca that it becomes kind of strange when people come to a space and be like, I'm not a Wiccan. Like, it just, I don't know. I think there's something very peculiar about that, and I think we should examine that in more detail. Also, Wiccans are distinguished by the belief in something called the Wiccan Rede, which is basically, there's a long version of it, but basically it's in harm none, do what you will. And many people point out that it's impossible to live on the planet without harm to something or someone. But I think that really misses the point of what Wicca is saying in the Rede. I think the point is that we respect other people's integrity and other beings' right to exist, and we try to minimize any harm that we might cause. I think that's a noble kind of morality. I don't think that's something that can be weaponized against Wiccans the way I've seen it weaponized against Wiccans, as if belief that we should try not to harm others is somehow there's something wrong with that. I don't get that. I think there's something psychopathic about that line of thinking usually that I find very disturbing. And having said that, I will say that there are moments and times when magic has to be used in defense of the vulnerable, in defense of ourselves if we're threatened, And I think that's perfectly justifiable, harm or not. I think that it's perfectly justifiable to use magic or not normal means to protect the innocent or the vulnerable who are being attacked, even if that causes harm to the attacker. I think that that's perfectly fine. I don't think Wiccans disagree with that. And I think that there's this tendency for people to take the read very literally in a way that was never intended, and in a way that Wiccans don't take it themselves. Wiccan friends, if I'm wrong, please correct me in the comments. I would love to hear your input about this. Also, it bears pointing out that it's always a popular point of view to claim I can do whatever I want without any kind of repercussions or consequences, and that's just blatantly false. That's just not true. Everything that we do has consequences, and some things that we do when we lash out or act out in negative ways, those certainly should come with consequences. And not all of them are immediately apparent, but it's something that if you think deeply enough about, you'll realize that just engaging in that kind of behavior changes the way you think, and that's bound to change what happens in your life and how the quality of your life. So I would encourage everyone to think very deeply about that. But the Wiccan Rite is something that distinguishes Wicca as a religion, in my opinion. So that distinction between Wicca and witchcraft is very crucial, I think. Not all witches are Wiccans, but all Wiccans are witches. And I think that it also bears pointing out that at the time that Wicca emerged, they regarded witchcraft as a religion and still do. And the word Wicca is linguistically and etymologically related to the English word witchcraft. It was used synonymously and almost universally for a long time. It's only been in the past decade or so that people have been like, oh no, there's a distinction here and we're not Wiccan. And I don't know, I think that that's something that we have to bear in mind. To complicate matters, there's also the way that anthropologists and sociologists use the term witchcraft to describe indigenous practices in tribal settings outside of the developed world. And that makes it very convoluted when we use the word witchcraft. So there's no wonder that there's a lot of confusion in the world about what witchcraft is and what it isn't. So it behooves us to be very clear about what we're talking about. And then there's the pagan element, or the neo-pagan element. Paganism generally refers to a number of different kinds of religions, some of them reconstructionist, of pantheons and practices that have been dead for a very long time. And some of them are eclectic. Some of them are very careful to follow what we know about ancient practices, like in the Egyptian pantheon, Kemetic, or in the Norse Asatru things. Some things we don't know what they did, because a lot of the times things weren't written down in the way that we would like them to have been. And so there are a lot of practices in the world that are modern being blended with things that are quite ancient. It bears remembering that there is no unbroken line between antiquity and the religions that are being practiced today that we call pagan. And people in ancient times wouldn't have recognized the word pagan to describe their religions at all. Pagan was a word that was used by Christians first as a kind of derogatory term to describe people who hadn't converted to the new religion. And it referred to people who lived in the outskirts in the country and that kind of thing. Sort of like saying, oh, look at they're uneducated because they don't live in the city and they haven't adopted the better way, right? So those are pagans. And practitioners today have kind of reclaimed that term as an umbrella term to refer to a number of earth-based, nature-based kinds of religious practices, some of them wildly eclectic. And Wicca is a good example of that. It is a pagan religion that is very eclectic and draws from multiple sources and things, which is another criticism that people level against it. I haven't seen any sound examples of people accusing Wicca of cultural appropriation. I just don't see that anybody was exploited or anyone was taken advantage of, or that they didn't have a right to the practices that were integrated into Wicca. A great deal of what happens in Wicca comes from ceremonial magic and Christian and Jewish sources. So I just don't think that that's really a valid accusation to level against Wicca. Cultures influence each other and things die out, things are revived. And that doesn't mean that there's any nefarious kind of intention going on there. Be that as it may, there are people who practice magic who avoid the term pagan or witch or Wiccan altogether. There are ceremonial magicians who practice magic, and many of them consider themselves to be Christians or atheists or agnostic. There's a lot of diversity in the practices that happen today, and not everyone uses the word witch to describe themselves. So I hope this little video sparks some interest in the discussion surrounding like what we mean when we say Wicca, witchcraft, pagan, magic, all of those things, and how they intersect. My primary concern is that we alienate each other when we become rigid and dogmatic in the use of those terms. And I think that we would be better served as magical people or just as humans living on the earth if we didn't divide ourselves in that way. And if we came together and respected the different practices that we have and go from there. I think that's really the healthy way. So hopefully this sparks some interesting discussion. Leave your perspectives in the comments below and tell me what you think about it and how you've experienced those terms in your life and in your practice. And hopefully that will help us all to understand each other a bit better. May the mighty ones bless and keep you, and blessed be and peace.